House is now resumed. Please be seated. Continuation of debate. Does any other member wish to speak? The member from West Bay Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to join my colleagues in congratulating Her Excellency, the Governor Helen Kilpatrick, on the throne speech, the Honorable Premier on the budget policy statement, and Honorable Minister for Finance on his first two-year budget plan for the 18-19 years. Mr. Speaker, this is my first budget as a ministerial counselor for environment and housing. And so it's a great privilege to address this Honorable House on these subjects. Having been involved in water sports since the age of 10 years old, I can tell you that the environment, both around our shores and on land, has always been a true passion of mine. The matter of affordable housing is equally important to me as we seek to ensure that all Caymanians have the opportunity to own a place they can truly call home. Environment, achievements and challenges. Mr. Speaker, not long after taking office in May, the Honorable Minister and I met with DOE Director Gina Ebanks-Petrie and her deputies to learn about the important work being implemented by her department. I was very impressed with the many good works being carried out by the Department of Environment and the entire team. And I share their aims to protect our natural resources in these beloved isles. I have never made it a secret that I have my own views regarding management of the environment, but no one should ever doubt my passion and love of the environment, whether on land or the ocean. And so, I do appreciate and respect the hard work that is done by the staff of the Department of Environment. Mr. Speaker, there have been some significant achievements and challenges pertaining to the DOE during the 2016-2017 financial year, which I wish to note and share with members of this Honorable House. First of all, I am pleased to say that in 2016, the Ministry commenced the Endangered Species Trade and Transport Amendment Law 2015 to implement the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. The aim of this law is to better regulate the trade and transport of animals and plants between the three Cayman Islands. The 15th of August 2016 saw the commencement of Parts 5 and 7 of the National Conservation Law. However, Sections 46 and 47, which deal with the Environmental Protection Fund, has not yet been commenced. And I know my colleagues in the Department of Environment may disagree with me, but I have to say that I am glad that these sections have not yet commenced, and I will say why shortly. Parts 5 and 7 relate to the issuance of permits and licenses, as well as general obligations under the law, including the obligations of all government entities to consult with the National Conservation Council. Mr. Speaker, Section 5 also provided for a new licensing regime for spear fishing that would allow the importation of parts for spear guns. It was obvious from the debate that the will of the people's representatives on the passage of the law was that this licensing regime was one that they wanted. But after a full year, the National Conservation Council has yet to act on the wish of this honorable House and the law. Instead, the National Conservation Council noted in their 2016 annual report that, and I quote, "The Council's view is that spearfishing will thus continue to be a licensing-able activity for the foreseeable future, and it is difficult for the Council to justify licensing spear guns in the absence of expansion of the marine protected areas. The reason for this is that Section 22(1) requires the Council to be satisfied that any such licensing will not be detrimental to the survival of nor reduce any population of a protected species," unquote. I am not an attorney, Mr. Speaker, but the relevant section speaks to licensing to an individual and not to some broad requirement to license. If the Council can be satisfied that the individual is responsible and will spearfish only in agreed areas, then I humbly suggest that the Council should follow the law. It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that the NCC, I am certain with the best of intentions, may be attempting to put their will before that of the lawmakers. And interestingly enough, may also be utilizing the spearfishing licensing issue as some kind of quid pro quo for expanding marine parks. If so, I must say that this is not their role. They should instead follow the law or make suggestions on how to clarify it so that they can do the job required by the law around licensing. It is issues like this, Mr. Speaker, along with the concerns expressed by the Premier, as well as the Minister for Health, why I am pleased that the remaining sections have not been commenced, and also why I support the review of the National Conservation Law. The purpose of the review will be to ensure that the law is working as intended and to fix any areas where it is not. We will appoint a review committee of various stakeholders, including a representative from the NCC as well as the DOE. Mr. Speaker, in November 2016, DOE hosted the annual Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute meeting, which touched on important subjects such as marine protected areas, the management of spawning aggregations, and climate change impacts on marine environments. In April 2017, with its project partners from universities of Liverpool and Exeter in the UK, the DOE completed its first year of research and monitoring in a 2-year Darwin Plus funded project aimed at assessing the conservation status and needs of seabird and seabird populations in the Cayman Islands, including the regionally important red-footed booby colony on Little Cayman. The project is now in its second year, and following completion of a final period of field work early in the year, data analysis will be completed. The recommendations for conservation actions will be deployed. In May of this year, DOE celebrated another significant accomplishment. On recommendation from the National Conservation Council, the first terrestrial protected areas established under the National Conservation Law were approved on Crown land in Grand Cayman and Little Cayman. The Crown land is in the proposed Barkers National Park, Vidal Key, and the Crown Mangrove Keys along the western perimeter of the North Sound. Also included in Crown land in the central mangrove wetland. Crown land in Lower Valley Forest and additional parcel of Crown land in Booby Pond Nature Reserve. Mr. Speaker, turning now to an issue which I know is the topic of many conversations both among members of this House and the general public, the green iguanas. This invasive species has become a serious nuisance and the population explosion following Hurricane Ivan in 2004, they are an extreme nuisance, and finding a solution to control them continues to be very vexing, to say the least. Pity, Mr. Speaker, the country, including the management of DOE, did not take the eradication of green iguanas a few years earlier. We would, I believe, have been farther ahead, but we are where we are, and this funding, if used wisely, should make a dent in the population of these pests. And we will continue this funding in years ahead, increasing it as resources allow. Having said that, bounty hunting by registered Caymanians paid for iguana kill has not made a significant impact on eradicating the green iguana population, which has grown beyond 1 million. But undoubtedly, for every one that we kill, we are preventing the population to explode by increasing by several hundred. By the 1st of November 2017, colors had removed only 16,500 iguanas, which is a small number compared to the wild population. But as dead iguanas will not reproduce, by my estimation, we have avoided many thousands more green iguanas being added to the wild population. And, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that if we pay the colors adequately, we may find that there may be more colors coming forward and much more culling done. Turning now to the National Housing Development Trust. The Trust has worked to progress the plans for affordable homes to join the existing ones on the Bordentown site. I am pleased to advise, Mr. Speaker, that the Trust has very recently received the necessary planning and building control unit approvals to build these additional units, and I expect that they will commence construction early in the year. The past year also saw the National Housing Development Trust entering negotiations with various banks to launch a second government-guaranteed home assistance mortgage program. Initially rolled out between 2007 and 2012, this program helped 325 Caymanian families achieve home ownership. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we will be able to provide some very positive news on this program in the very near future. Department of Environment, looking ahead. I would now like to highlight some of the Department of Environment's plans for the next 2 years. Mr. Speaker, the DOE will continue to implement its ongoing research, monitoring, and enforcement programs aimed at the conservation and sustainable use of native species and ecosystems. Plans are also underway for the establishment of additional protected land area, subject to recommendations from the National Conservation Council, extensive public consultation, and the allocation of the necessary funding from the Environmental Protection Fund. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Environment will continue its efforts to address the threat of alien invasive species, particularly green iguanas and lionfish. Given that ongoing research and monitoring work has identified feral cats as a significant threat to the health of both the populations of sister islands, rock iguanas, and seabirds, the DOE will also begin work with relevant government agencies and external experts to address this growing problem. The DOE will continue to provide technical advice and guidance to Cabinet and other government agencies on plans, projects, and policies likely to have an adverse impact on the natural environment and resources. In addition, the Department will continue to provide guidance on ongoing environmental impact assessments, including the Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion Proposal, the Integrated Solid Waste Management System, as well as updates on the environmental impact assessment for the proposed cruise berthing facility. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, Cabinet will appoint a committee to review the National Conservation Law, and both the DOE and NCC will have a seat on the committee. I am looking forward to working with all parties to ensure that we achieve the right balance for the National Conservation Law during the intended review. Housing, looking ahead. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak to the plans of the National Housing Development Trust for the upcoming financial period. The Trust will continue its efforts to keep moving forward with the various housing programs that are designed to help Caymanians achieve the dream of home ownership. The government guaranteed home assisted mortgage program will be relaunched once government and participating banks finalize and sign the necessary agreements. I thank the participating banks for their willingness to embark on this program again. And I know that there will be many Caymanians who will also be grateful for the support they are able to achieve homeownership through this program. New Affordable Housing Initiative Program continues to provide affordable housing to Caymanians. It gives our people help towards owning the affordable houses that have been constructed in East End, Georgetown, and Bordentown, and West Bay. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report that the second phase of the Bordentown affordable housing site is scheduled to start within the coming months. I look forward to seeing these new affordable homes being made available to the deserving families who will have the privilege of owning them. We also should, Mr. Speaker, look to encourage private sector to build affordable homes. As the Premier has noted, government will look at how to insensitize private sector, including looking at the size of the properties to be used for affordable homes, so as to keep the costs down. Mr. Speaker, as the government moves forward on many constructive programs to help Caymanians by giving more to the elderly, more to the students, more to the health services, more for our roads, our docks, our airports, our solid waste, more for enhancements of our infrastructure and the safety of our people. Mr. Speaker, more all around. However, those who don't want to see these will say there's nothing being done. Mr. Speaker, we need to do something about our students having to get a visa to go to Jamaica, to get a student visa for entry into the United States to attend universities or colleges of their choice. I believe that efforts now need to be made to get the USA Council in Jamaica to come to Cayman, which I guess we would have to pay for, but I feel it can be done. The interview process can take place here in Cayman, even if they have to take the passports back to Jamaica for processing. I believe we need to do something we can, everything we can, which might mean getting our lawyers in Washington to move to negotiate a new initiative to afford our students an easier way to get their student visa. This is an initiative we campaigned on, and I believe that if enough effort is given, it can be achieved sooner rather than later. Mr. Speaker, there is much to say about community pride and how we all can work to keep our districts clean. Our people need to be able to play their part, and the vast majority do. But there are those who are using the Barkers area as a dumping ground again. Hopefully, we will remedy this in the new year by creating employment for Caymanians as cleaners and watchmen for the area. Mr. Speaker, because you are the Honorable Speaker, I know you would want myself, the Honorable Minister for Financial Services, and the elected member for West Bay North to speak on these matters for your constituency. Mr. Speaker, I am aware that you are currently working on specific roads, that you are also working on 2 area parks suited for younger children. One is located in Northwest Point and one in the Bosun Bay. For our district overall, we are working on a new cemetery, and we believe that it is possible to begin in this present budget cycle. Also, the primary school and the new police station. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. In conclusion, I thank everybody in the ministry who has given me such a warm welcome as a ministerial counselor in the government of national unity. There is a great deal of work to be done in the months and years ahead, but I am confident that strength of the coalition will allow us to achieve great things, and that will benefit everybody in the Cayman Islands. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other Honorable Deputy Governor?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the throne speech, policy statement, and budget address. And I would like to commend Her Excellency, the Premier and the Minister of Finance for their excellent job in delivering those speeches, which together, Mr. Speaker, sets out an ambitious plans of the government for continued sound fiscal management, strengthening governance arrangements, and better outcomes for the Cayman Islands and its people. Mr. Speaker, I have to say that it was a sad moment for me to listen to Her Excellency the Governor give her last throne speech here in the Parliament. She has been an excellent governor and a great boss to me. I have learned much from her, Mr. Speaker. She has pushed me and inspired me to perform at a higher level, which is exactly what a good boss does, and I sincerely thank her for that. And I'm going to miss her. Mr. Speaker, I will say no more, about her because she's going to be leaving in March, and I will speak at that time. But I do want to wish her and her family God's richest blessings. Mr. Speaker, I do want to also thank all of the members here who have spoken and who have said some very kind words about the civil service. And I'm proud this afternoon as Deputy Governor to hear so many of the members from both sides speak in very favorable terms about the civil service and acknowledge the good work that has been going on in the civil service for many years now. Mr. Speaker, as Deputy Governor and head of the civil service, I recognize the important role that civil servants plays in helping the government to achieve its political priorities. A dynamic and nimble civil service is critical for the delivery of exemplary public services. And that's one of the things that our Premier keeps reminding me about, it being nimble and moving things along quickly. That's something that we want to continually focus on. It's important to have efficient and effective government and for turning policy into reality, which positively changes people's lives. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the government for the funding provided in the 16-17 budget to address globally a long-standing and urgent issue of pay stagnation within the civil service. Doing all of this while remaining prudent in our financial management. In my last budget contribution, I reminded this Honorable House that in response to the financial crisis facing the government, numerous HR austerity measures have been adopted within the civil service. These were very painful at times, including an actual prohibition to offer within grade pay increases where persons remained in the same job. To compound the issue, Mr. Speaker, while existing staff who maintained the same pay grade were curtailed from progressing in their pay, new recruits and new people coming in were able to join the organization and negotiate higher salaries, more in line with their pay, which had been progressed during their careers outside the civil service. At that time, our data indicated that there were some 900 employees who had remained on the same salary point for at least 7 years. In addition, as of June 2015, one of every 3 civil servants was still on the very first point of their pay scales. During the same period, 8 out of 10 civil servants were on or below the middle point of the salary scale. So you can see why, Mr. Speaker, it was really imperative that the government work with us to remedy this situation, and I am so pleased that the government did, and I'm very grateful. So are many, many civil servants. So, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the funding provided by the government, we have been able to remedy that situation, and this particular austerity measure has now been repealed. In 16-17, more than 1,500 employees received increments based upon their lack of progression for at least 3 years or more. This in addition to the 892 employees in 2015 and 2016 who received pay increases for promotions, reevaluations, or increments, including teachers, police officers, and customs and immigration officers. I must tell you, Mr. Speaker, that this has had a very positive effect across the civil service. And now civil servants can do a better job of taking care of their families and being able to enjoy life a little better. As the Honorable Premier noted when he announced these awards, the government was largely able to achieve this by realizing savings within the personnel budget and in turn reinvesting those savings to reward civil servants' productivity. And it should be acknowledged that the savings in personnel costs were a key factor allowing the government to achieve compliance with the framework for fiscal responsibility. I do want to emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that in doing all of this, we focused on performance. if you were not performing at the level that was expected, these rewards, I should say you were not eligible for these rewards, because we have to focus on high performance continually across the civil service. Mr. Speaker, in my contribution to the budget debate, I will be sharing some of the highlights and work that we have accomplished during the 16-17 financial period as the civil service works to serve the government and the people of the Cayman Islands. We will also look at some of the lessons that we have learned, and we will use those lessons that we have learned to perform better. I am also excited to look ahead and share with you our ambitious plans for continued progress and improvements during the 2018 and 2019 financial years. Mr. Speaker, allow me to say a few things about audits and accountability. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, July, the Office of the Auditor General published a report which followed up on the actions of the civil service has taken in response to past PAC recommendations on 8 reports that were tabled in 2016. I was pleased to note that the Office of the Auditor General reported that 4 or half of the Auditor General reports, the following judgments was delivered. Significant progress has been made, and the government has implemented or has taken action to implement most of all of the recommendations. That is good, Mr. Speaker. We got 4 out of 8, but that's just okay. We want to have 8 out of 8 going forward. But I do acknowledge the progress and thank all of the civil servants who worked hard to achieve those outstanding results. Just to drill down a bit into the reports, there was a report on management and travel and hospitality expenditure. The Office of the Auditor General reported good progress. It was noted that we had implemented a travel policy back in 2013. We had continued to track and implement the policy, and we were pleased to report that expenditure on travel across the civil service had reduced significantly. For example, between 12-13 to in the years 12-13 to 15-16, the Ministry of Finance reported that travel and subsistence expenditures had decreased, resulting in a savings of $3.2 million over the 4-year period, compared to expenses in 11-12. In July 2016, we made some further improvements and issued a revised travel policy. The Ministry also continued to proactively publish credit card and travel expenses on their website. I'm also pleased to be able to advise that on the 1st of June 2017, we brought into force a companion policy on offering or receiving hospitality, entertainment, or gifts, which was again another recommendation from the Auditor General. The Auditor General also reported on government IT security, and the Office of the Auditor General reported that the government had made good progress in implementing the recommendations made, and this is critical work, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the government's information and communications technology is protected. Mr. Speaker, the other recommendation concerned the major capital projects of building schools. The two recommendations from this report involved the development of a new government's framework for major capital projects, including changes to the PFML, and carrying out an assessment of the John Gray High School project site, and developing a strategy to manage risk and future development, which the OAG, Office of the Auditor General, judged to have been implemented. So, Mr. Speaker, the government has made great strides in its management of major capital projects. The investment in the establishment of a major projects office, which the Minister of Works talked about earlier, staffed up with experienced project management professionals, is paying dividends. There is now a newly established governance framework to ensure consistent best practice and compliance with the requirements of the FFR. The progress being made on such complex projects as the development of cruise berthing facilities and waste management strategies and other projects, such as the recently completed John Gray Gymnasium, are all examples of the positive impact this internal resource has had on the delivery of major capital projects. Mr. Speaker, this is a fantastic achievement for us. Previous Auditor General reports criticized us for the way in which we managed our major capital projects. That has now changed. We are relying on expertise, sound project management expertise, and have a major projects office that will allow persons with the requisite skills to manage our major capital projects. And this is very important, Mr. Speaker, because over the next few years, the airport redevelopment is going to finish. Work on the INSWIM project is going to take off with earnest, and so will the port redevelopment. Those are huge capital projects, and I'm pleased to be able to report that the civil service is poised to be able to deliver those projects in compliance with the FFR and ensure good value for money. The Auditor General report also looked at the nation building program, and it found that the deficiencies in the program were now being remedied. We had issued policies on transfer payments, and we had established some best practices, appropriate framework, and clear roles and responsibilities, and to ensure fairness, transparency, and accountability for expenditure in relation to transfer payments. Financial and performance reporting, and the National Land Development and Government Real Property was the other report. And Mr. Speaker, regretfully, the reports on progress in relation to the other four performances were less favorable, and I spoke about that earlier. So the Auditor General judged that some progress had been made in relation to the audits on financial and performance reporting and national land development and government real property. Therefore, while progress was evident, Mr. Speaker, it was not the levels that we would have expected and desired. Nevertheless, I would like to acknowledge that in some key areas, important work had been accomplished, which has strengthened our financial management within the civil service. Annual reports. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight the continued progress by government ministries, portfolios, and offices in moving towards the goal of all entities receiving unqualified audit reports within the legal timeline provided by the Public Management and Finance Law. Mr. Speaker, we can all remember the headlines in the past which spoke of hundreds of millions of dollars of public funds unaccounted for. I remember the leader of the opposition calling for CFOs to come down to the parliament to explain why the audits were in such bad shape. But Mr. Speaker, by 14-15, the civil service has faced the challenge and started to deliver real results. A majority of the ministries in 14-15 received clean audit opinions. Today, we have finance teams that are sustaining this progress by maintaining unqualified audit opinion years after year. Mr. Speaker, all indications that we have suggest that 15-16 will be our best year yet. The Office of the Auditor General has advised that it has completed audits of 13 of the 16 ministries, portfolios, and offices. Of these, Mr. Speaker, 12, or 92%, have received an unqualified opinion. 92%, 1 or 8% has received a qualified opinion. None have received an adverse opinion. None have received a disclaimer of opinion. What does that mean, Mr. Speaker? That means that the people now know exactly how their money is being spent. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has written us to commend us, and I understand is holding a Public Accounts Committee meeting in December to recognize these achievements. So, Mr. Speaker, in a few short years, we have gone from being summoned to park to be criticized to being summoned to park to be commended. That is exactly the type of achievement we want to deliver to the government and to the people of the Cayman Islands. That's what they deserve. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, another important development is that we have now delivered on another outstanding recommendation from the Office of the Auditor General, who in the past had criticized us for not submitting our annual reports, which go into detail about how the money is being spent. Again, Mr. Speaker, in 15-16, all agencies submitted their annual reports, and that brings our reporting in line with the Public Service and Management Law. Some of those reports were labeled, I think, tabled up until this week. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased with the excellent continued progress these audit reports have been receiving. It demonstrates that we are well on our way to achieving our goal of 100% of our agencies receiving unqualified opinions. We are well on our way, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, we have also made important developments in the area of procurement. Again, the Auditor General had informed us of some weaknesses in our procurement. In my last budget address, I advised that we will be delivering a new procurement bill to this House, and I'm pleased to report that the bill was passed on October 2016. Regulations are now being reviewed by our Cabinet with the goal of full implementation of the new legislation in April 2018. The procurement legislation is just part of the governance framework that has been delivered to ensure fairness, efficiency, transparency, and value for money in the procurement management system and practices within the civil service. Our new procurement office, which was established in 2015, has trained almost 200 civil servants in procurement. Civil servants are using new tools and templates, including e-tendering capabilities. The use of innovative methodologies like electronic reverse auctions, or ERAs, have already delivered significant cost savings in such areas as pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, and computers for school. Mr. Speaker, 3 ERAs conducted within the civil service in July 2016 has delivered net savings of $336,020. The projected savings from 3 ERAs conducted for the HSA are estimated to bring upwards of savings of $6 million in net savings. And Mr. Speaker, this is just the beginning. Based on the 14-15 historical spend for the core government and HSA, electronic reverse auction expert has estimated potential savings of $27 million. That is a significant savings. Mr. Speaker, I have sat in on one of these reverse auctions just to watch how that works, and it's truly amazing to see this in operation. It's all done electronically. No one knows the names of the bidders, and you can just watch how the persons can see what the bids are. They can see what other persons are bidding without knowing their identities, and they have an hour or 2 hours to basically match the bids. And they can see if somebody is bidding $10 and you feel you can do it for $9.50, you bid $9.50, and that just keeps going down, and you can see the level of savings that has been achieved by using electronic capabilities and the reversed auctions. We're doing things differently in government, and we are achieving fantastic results. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General also talked about government programs supporting those in need and collecting government revenues. Mr. Speaker, I am disappointed to note that the Office of the Auditor General reported that only limited progress had been made in these critical areas of importance. Mr. Speaker, we have tackled these issues head on, and we are going to address these issues. We are working very closely with our new counselor for community affairs, who is a very hands-on counselor, along with our premier, to ensure that we address these issues and deliver the results, again, that our people deserve in this area of supporting our needed persons who are in need. Supporting democracy and good governance. Mr. Speaker, the civil service delivered in a number of areas to support democracy and governance. Before I go there, I just want to mention, Mr. Speaker, that the latest Auditor General's report that spoke about capital projects again mentioned that significant progress had been made in dealing with how we oversee and deliver our major capital projects. But, Mr. Speaker, you will recall that we oversaw the successful elections, which seemed like a long time ago, but I think it was only about 5 or 6 months ago, under a new single-member constituency system. And I want to commend the Supervisor of Elections, Mr. Howell, and his team of professionals who worked tirelessly, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we delivered fair and free and fair elections in the midst of the new and significant changes. Mr. Speaker, this Honorable House also passed legislation to create the Office of the Ombudsman, and we are very pleased to say that we have a new Ombudsman in post. He took up the post just last month, and I think we're going to see some fantastic work from the Ombudsman as she carries out her duties. And for the first time, Mr. Speaker, we are going to have independent oversight of complaints against the police. That has never happened before. The public has asked for it. The government has delivered. I've got 20 pages left. Whistleblowing protection. Mr. Speaker, during the 16-17 financial year, this Honorable House passed Whistleblowing Protection Bill 2016, which was scheduled to be commenced on the 1st of February 2018. That was one of the responsibilities of our new ombudsman. We wanted to make sure she was in post before the legislation came into effect. Mr. Speaker, this legislation applies to both the public and private sector, and it's a critical part of the country's anti-corruption strategy. It provides protection by law for persons who are often reluctant to report suspected misconduct because they fear retaliation from those who are engaged in the misconduct. Mr. Speaker, within the Cayman Islands government, I am pleased to note that in May 2017, we have rolled out for the civil service a comprehensive policy framework for addressing, deterring, identifying, and tackling fraud, which includes an anti-fraud policy, code of business ethics and conduct, our internal whistleblowing policy, and a policy on offering or receiving hospitality, entertainment, or gifts. This brings the civil service in compliance with the new whistleblower protection law, which requires all agencies, public and private, to put in place appropriate policies in line with the law. So we wanted to get ahead of the game, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, we have not simply prepared and distributed a detailed policy and hoped that it would get implemented. We have developed, using in-house expertise, interactive models on these policies, which are available online through the Civil Service College. I have required all civil servants to have access to these modules by the end of the month. So we want to make sure that the civil servants are aware of these policies. They go online, they review the videos, they take a test, which ensures that they are up to speed with our anti-fraud policy. And we want them to understand what their roles and responsibilities are to prevent and address fraud and corruption. Mr. Speaker, this Honorable House also passed the Public Authorities Bill. The government now has legislation that provides for a common and best practice governance framework for statutory authorities and government-owned companies. Again, an historic piece of legislation. Records and information management. Mr. Speaker, sound management of public records and information is the cornerstone of good governance. It promotes accountability and transparency, and having a robust information management strategy in place ensures better information for a more efficient government. In May 2017, the National Archives finalized a new records and information management standard for the civil service, which provides guidance to public agencies to assist with compliance measures set out in the National Archives and Public Records Law 2015 revision. And adherence to the principles set out in this standard will help us achieve the government's vision for being open and accountable to the people of the Cayman Islands. As we look forward to the implementation of this standard over the next 2 years, my expectation is that we will not only upgrade records and information management throughout the service, but that ministries and portfolios and their agencies will be more efficient and effective in serving the public as a result. HR reforms. Mr. Speaker, within the civil service, we have continued to invest in HR reforms over the past year. One critical achievement involving legislative amendments to increase the normal retirement age to 65. These activities could be measured in the numbers of laws changed, or the hundreds of persons consulted, or the hours spent by the various teams in delivering the project. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, the immediate beneficiaries of this policy are over 5,000 public servants who have a greater flexibility in their careers and now who have gained the opportunity to save longer and increase their retirement nest egg. Mr. Speaker, for a very long time, we have heard that people wanted to work beyond age 60, that they were capable, that they were physically fit. This allows those persons to work up until age 65. The successful implementation of this project also serves to shore up the sustainability of the public service pension fund, as this has the potential to save as much as $30 million over the long term by extending people's working careers. 30 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, September 2017 marks the one-year anniversary of the raise in the retirement age. And here are some of the stats that speak to the impact that this policy has had to date within the civil service. A total of 261 persons are currently working beyond the age of 60, the previous retirement age. 261 persons. A total of 216 persons are employed between the ages of 60 to 64. Of these, 175 have resumed saving towards their full retirement. So they have suspended their pension. They have said, I want to reinvest back into the pension so that when I retire, my pension will be a bit higher. That reduces then our pension liability because more money is going into the fund. In addition, 45 persons are continuing to work at age 65 and beyond. So, Mr. Speaker, we've been flexible, and where persons are able to work beyond age 65, we have kept them on. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn and speak a bit about succession planning and the advancements of Caymanians in the civil service. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that this is an area that everyone in this House has a passion about. Chief officers and I share that passion, and we have evidence to prove it. Mr. Speaker, this is probably one of the most talked about areas in the civil service, across the public service, in the private sector. What are we doing to ensure that our Caymanians are being trained up, are given the opportunities to better themselves? Because, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, we as the leaders of this country, we as the leaders in the civil service, have an overriding responsibility to give our people an opportunity. All of us got an opportunity from someone. And we have an obligation to do the same for the persons who are coming behind us. Just a few minutes ago, the member from West Bay West and I was talking about this same matter. He certainly shares the same passion that we do in terms of the advancement of Caymanians. Mr. Speaker, our commitment to supporting the learning and development of our civil servants continues through the work of our Civil Service College. And more civil servants are taking up the opportunity to upskill and prepare themselves for improved performance and career advancement. The latest data indicates and proves this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2,044 employees participated in online learning. 2,000. 1,219 employees participated in various workshops and seminars that we offered. We had 70 employees graduate with an Associate of Arts in Public Administration through our partnership with UCCI. This included 16 persons who graduated last night. We are particularly proud of the 2017 graduating class, as it includes, Mr. Speaker, our first cohort of 8 graduates from the Cayman BRAC campus. These 8 students from the BRAC performed quite well, Mr. Speaker, including this year's valedictorian for the Associate's Program, Ms. Raquel Matute, who graduated, with a 4.0 GPA. So our civil servants are doing exceptionally well across the islands, and we're ensuring that our civil servants in the sister islands have access to good education. Another 147 employees have completed or are pursuing leadership and management qualifications through the Institute of Leadership and Management, which the Civil Service College is an accredited center. 5 civil servants, Mr. Speaker, are pursuing their Bachelor of Arts degrees at UCCI and have earned a full tuition scholarship from the Civil Service College based on their outstanding performance in the Associates of Arts program. They have earned a full tuition scholarship, Mr. Speaker. A further 10 employees have undertaken a global executive leadership course in partnership with UCCI and the Florida International University. This course is partially sponsored by the Civil Service College. Mr. Speaker, we are doing our endeavor best to give our people opportunities, and you can see, Mr. Speaker, that many, many civil servants are taking up that opportunity to upskill themselves. Mr. Speaker, we have continued to make great strides in filling senior roles within the civil service with qualified and experienced staff. For example, 3 deputy chief officer roles were filled by Ms. Dolores Gordon, Tammy Ebanks, and Setonya Cacho. A deputy chief advisor role by Dr. Tasha Garcia Ebanks Garcia. Other positions include the clerk of courts by Shona Allinger, 2 deputy collector of customs by Mr. Jeff Jackson, Mr. Kevin Walton, deputy commissioner of police by Mr. Kurt Walton, chief internal communication officer by Ms. Aubrey Borden, director of education services by Ms. Lenith Monteith, deputy director of community rehabilitation, Ms. Lisa Mallis, a CFO within the Ministry of Community Affairs, Mr. Joel Burke. We have in our parliament here, Ms. Deborah Broderick, who was just promoted up to be assistant clerk. We want to congratulate her. Mr. Speaker, all of these persons have something in common. They are all Caymanians who have filled senior roles in their civil service. All 12 or 13 of these persons are Caymanians, and they have been promoted up within the civil service. But, Mr. Speaker, we have had to fill some posts by non-Caymanians, some senior posts. I spoke about the ombudsman. We have our commissioner of police, Mr. Byrne. We have the director of the Office of Education Standards, Mr. Peter Carpenter. We have the director of Children and Family Services by Ms. Felicia Robinson. We have an HR director in the Ministry of Education, Mr. Dave Bailey, and a director of legal aid, Mr. Stacey Park. But, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't stop here. We now have at MRCU a pilot, a Caymanian pilot named Mr. Benjamin Tressiter, who is now flying the MRCU plane, which means both of our pilots at MRCU are now Caymanian. He started off in the MRCU. He approached them about wanting to work with them. They brought him on. He went off. He got the experience. We then came back into the department, and now he has been appointed as a pilot. Mr. Speaker, we have not one, but 2 Caymanians who have been recently qualified as tactical flight officers in our air operations unit, the helicopter unit within the RCIP. We have 2 Caymanians who are now recently qualified as tactical flight officers, and they are now will be given the necessary support and training. So, Mr. Speaker, I do hope that one day, what I just said about MRCU, we will be able to say about our air operations unit, that it is staffed up by Caymanians. Mr. Speaker, in the Ministry of Health, and that's where the MRCU is, we have 2 young Caymanians, Mr. Speaker, who have just returned from being recipients of the Achieving Scholarship. Mrs. Christina Ross took a year off. She came to us, she said, I would like to go off and pursue my master's degree. The chief officer, Ms. Ahern, found a way to allow her to go off while holding the job for her. We had another lady in another department who wanted to gain some HR experience, so she was allowed to come in, fill that role temporarily, while this young lady realized her dream, and now she has returned. We have Mr. Richard Tyson, who was a former and intern in the same ministry, who has also been an achieving scholarship recipient. He has now come home. He is now working in the ministry, and we do hope that he will now join the Department of Environment in the engineering field. These are young, bright Caymanians, Mr. Speaker, who are now in the civil service. We have a very bright future, Mr. Speaker, in the civil service. We have some amazing young Caymanians who we are giving an opportunity to progress up, and they are making us proud. Mr. Speaker, succession secondment policy. Mr. Speaker, a few years ago, we developed an internal secondment policy across the civil service. This allowed persons to undertake job shadowing and training for future career advancement. It helped us to break down the silos that might impede upward mobility. Mr. Speaker, I believe that we may have maybe 10 or 20 people that may want to have taken up this secondment opportunity, because we had so many people that were going off, getting their master's degrees in HR and other areas, but then they were saying, I don't have the experience. I got my HR degree. How can I get experience? But this secondment policy allows them to go and work sometimes a few days a week, sometimes a few months in a particular area so that they can get experience. Mr. Speaker, over the last few years, 42 civil servants have taken up that opportunity. It's more than that, but this is a number that I have right in front of me right now. I should say at least 42 persons have taken up that opportunity. Again, it shows, Mr. Speaker, that our Caymanians are hungry for advancement, and we are definitely meeting that challenge. Mr. Speaker, we are now looking at a professional advisory committee. Led by the portfolio of the civil service, work has begun to identify the exemplars in various profession and vocational clusters who can work with a team of other internal experts to identify skill gaps and priority areas of training and advise on succession plans for roles which exist across the organization. These committees will allow for greater coordination of efforts and commonality of approach given the decentralization of HR responsibilities to individual ministries and departments. Discipline and required leave. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that this honorable House has rightly taken concern about was the number of civil servants who are on required leave. In other words, out of the office while maintaining full pay. And the number of civil servants who were acting in post for extended periods of time. A member from North Sides referred to the civil service as Hollywood because so many people were acting. Mr. Speaker, in my speech last year, I announced that Hollywood had left the civil service. And I can say that again this year with confidence. We have tackled long-term acting head-on and filled the vast majority. I can only think of one senior position now that has not been filled. Additionally, during the past year, we have dramatically, Mr. Speaker, reduced the number of civil servants on required leave from 26 to 16 persons. Please appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that this list is not static. The numbers have reduced during the past year by some 11 persons having been released from employment, and another 14 have been put back to work. The number will grow from time to time when our civil service leaders continue to demonstrate a zero tolerance for misconduct, criminality, and corruption, and take bold steps to investigate allegations when they arise. Revisions are being made to the personnel regulations to address disciplinary procedures. Cabinet has already given approval for drafting instructions, and I do hope to bring back the paper to Cabinet before the end of the year, which will reduce the length of time a civil servant can be on suspension while receiving full pay, and to streamline the steps necessary for releasing persons who fail to uphold the code of conduct and meet acceptable performance levels. Mr. Speaker, we will also introduce policies to reduce the level of sick leave in the civil service. As a caring employer, we will always offer support to those who are genuinely sick, and we will continue to promote wellness to preserve the well-being of our staff and their families. However, there are some persons who regretfully abuse sick leave. I am concerned about the apparent ease with which some civil servants seem to be able to obtain sick notes. We are going to be looking carefully at this issue and closing loopholes where they exist. I predict this work will pay large dividends by boosting productivity and restoring confidence amongst the public at large, and the majority of hard-working men and women within the civil service who sometimes shoulder a disproportionate burden when their colleagues don't pull their own weight. Social responsibility and the DG's 5K. Mr. Speaker, we are making great strides within the civil service to promote exercise and personal fitness. Our Monday afternoon walk-run club continues to benefit civil servants from a wide range of professional backgrounds and fitness levels. The Deputy Governor's 5K Challenge promotes community involvement as well as promoting fitness by raising funds for local charities. I'm very proud to say, Mr. Speaker, that in 2017 we raised $85,000 for the YMCA. The event is organized by civil servants, and I wish to thank Ms. Chief Officer Jennifer Ahern and the many dedicated volunteers who make this event possible. I also wish to thank the many private sector companies who sponsor the event and show their support on the day by walking and running and walking side by side with the civil service. Good things happen when we all come together, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 4 years, we have raised just over $200,000 for local charities, and as we enter our 5th year, next year, I am pleased to announce that for the first time, the event will be held in Little Cayman. This means that the 5K event will be held in all 3 islands. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all members of this House, the Premier, and others who have come out, the Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier, Minister Hugh has been an avid supporter as well, Minister Rivers, I know Mrs. Connolly as well. Mr. Speaker, I do hope that you will join us next year. I know you're an avid walker as well, so I do hope that you will come out next year.
No, used to be.
Used to be, okay, used to be. And I promise you, sir, that we'll get you back home in time for church if you do want to come out. In addition to the funds raised through our fitness activities, Mr. Speaker, many charities are supported each year by staff donations and by civil servants participating in corporate dress-down days. Civil servants are also participating in volunteer activities, which included this year the Meals on Wheels program and reading activities at Lighthouse School. Mr. Speaker, I had the great pleasure of going out with about 30 civil servants and delivering meals a few weeks ago. And what a rewarding experience it is to get out in our community and meet some of our shut-ins and spend some time talking with them. It's a real education, and I would encourage the public to get out and support these programs. Mr. Speaker, allow me to spend a few minutes talking about the SAGCs that fall under my office. The Civil Aviation Authority of the Cayman Islands is a statutory authority that relies on non-coercive revenue for its growth and sustainability and does not receive a subsidy from the government. The revenues of the CAACI are mainly derived from the operation of the Cayman Islands Aircraft Registry as a strong competing offshore registration options for aircraft owners, operators, and maintenance organizations based globally. Over the past 12 months, the CAACI has continued to experience increasing aggressive competition as other jurisdictions compete for market share of offshore aircraft registration. Additionally, the authority is challenged in its ability to attract and retain ample qualified personnel that meet internationally mandated standards for regulatory personnel. Many factors, including constrained resources, competition from jurisdictions where salary and benefits far surpass the local offering, and the cost of living in the Cayman contribute to the recruitment challenges. Despite these challenges, Mr. Speaker, the CAACI has targeted and achieved conservative growth and maintenance of market share and has maintained a reputation as a credible regulator with excellent client service options. The CAACI has retained the governor's designation for regulatory oversight for all functional areas of aviation in the Cayman Islands, following successive assessment by the UK Air Safety International, or ASI, which is carried out as a means of assessing the ability of the CAACI to comply with the UK's international aviation obligations under the Convention on International Civil Aviation, also known as the Chicago Convention. The CI Aircraft Registry realized conservative growth during the period, with 236 aircraft registered at the end on the 30th of June 2017. The CAACI also issues approvals to maintenance organizations based globally, which allows them to maintain Cayman-registered aircraft to the specific standards of our regulatory code. At 30th of June 2017, there were 240 approved maintenance organizations holding CAACI approvals. Mr. Speaker, another milestone achievement was the setting up of the aviation park within the Cayman Special Economic Zone, Cayman Enterprise City. This allows an alternative means for CI-registered aircraft operators to provide CAT services offshore by establishing their principal place of business within the Special Economic Zone. It is envisaged that this will help diversify the registration subscriber base and also help the Cayman Islands compete with other jurisdictions that cater to offshore commercial air transport operations. Mr. Speaker, the CAACI has continued to refine work processes and procedures, embracing and employing electronic solutions such as its bespoke aviation data management cloud-based software, VPC Online, which also facilitates efficiencies and helps to achieve reduced costs with less paper production and retention of paper archives. Mr. Speaker, the CAACI continues to contribute to the general revenues of the Cayman Islands government by making annual dividend payments. A dividend payment of CI $2,301,271.68 was submitted in September 2016 to the Treasury. $2 million, Mr. Speaker. In looking to the future, the CAACI will focus on the retention of its full regulatory designation by the Governor UK for all functional regulatory matters, to recruit qualified personnel to ensure that we can meet our regulatory mandate and to provide for succession planning and business continuity, development of the CAACI corporate offices at the old Cayman Airways site at the Owen Roberts International Airport, which was just recently approved by Cabinet, so that the CAA will have their own home. Continue to target conservative growth of the aircraft registry by attracting qualified aircraft owners and operators. We'll also aim to achieve the financial results of the approved budget for the upcoming fiscal periods. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to say a bit about the Public Service Pension Board. I know this is an organization that is very important to all of us. Yes, as we get older. A significant milestone, Mr. Speaker, was achieved by the Public Service Pension Board, PSPB, in the 16-17 financial year, marking 25 years in operation. As part of the celebration of this event, the PSPB was rebranded with a new logo and hosted a series of events, including church services and appreciation events in recognition of retired public servants in Grand Cayman and in Cayman Brac. The PSPB hosted a gala event in March 2017 when it commemorated the contributions of its founding members, other past and present board directors, as well as dedication of the staff of the PSPB who were recognized for their sterling contributions over the last 25 years. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to recognize the contributions of the MD, Ms. Julie Evans Lindsay, who has been at the helm of the PSPB since its inception and who continues to see it grow from strength to strength. Also worthy of recognition is the fact that the PSPB is an active, diversified investor with a sophisticated investment program that has shown its ability to achieve above-average results in quarterlies within the best in class in its peer group. PSPB has the largest pool of investment assets in the public sector and likely the largest pension fund in these islands, having grown from a mere $3 million to in excess of $750 million US dollars under management, approximately 160 times its original size just 25 years ago. That's significant, Mr. Speaker. The government of the day entrusted the establishment and running of the PSBB to a few, and as a result, the welfare of many thousands of civil servants have been safeguarded for years to come. Government, as its principal sponsor, can now after 25 years, stand firmly behind its decision to establish the PSPB, as that decision is validated by the successes that I've just outlined. The tremendous significance of this venerable institution cannot be overstated, as the impacts of its work is self-evident in the lives of past, current, and future generations, and I congratulate them on their 25-year anniversary. In order to make the organization fit for purpose going forward, the MD has refocused the organization and has put in place an ambitious plan to restructure the organization by year end. The normal retirement age increase to 65 was perhaps the most significant change the public service pension law has done in recent years. This change has had a significant impact on public servants, allowing them to simultaneously continue in public service and to enhance their income in retirement. As services to the PSPB membership becomes more dependent on technology, PSPB has sought to improve its cybersecurity posture and has implemented a number of initiatives this financial year. With this in mind, the PSPB will continue its cyber awareness initiatives to ensure our staff continue to provide top-class service while ensuring privacy, confidentiality, and the integrity of our clients' data. Another highlight of the 16-17 year was the recruitment of an experienced pension expert from the UK to the position of Chief Pensions Officer position. In support of the PSPB 2022 strategy, which focuses on plan sustainability and excellence in the delivery of member services, the PSB priorities for 2018 will include full implementation and publication of service level agreements to govern the delivery of services to the membership, in partnership with my office and the Portfolio Civil Service to develop a pensioners association and advocacy role, procurement of a new pensions administration system that will aid in cutting costs and increase efficiencies in the delivery of services to the membership, implementation of a revised funding plan resulting from the 1st of January 2017 actuarial evaluation exercise, and continued efforts to enhance the PSPB cybersecurity program to be in compliance with local and international standards. Mr. Speaker, moving on to future legislation. Mr. Speaker, my office and my team is working on a number of bills and regulations which will be progressed and submitted to caucus and cabinet for approval. My office is working on important updates to the law and regulations for marriage. We received a number of complaints from our law enforcement agencies of bogus marriages and suspect marriages, and we want to have a law in place that actually works with immigration to prevent those bogus marriages. Also, the ability to properly deal with marriage officers who are not complying with the laws and regulations. A new prison inspection bill will ensure independent inspection of places of detention to report on conditions and treatment and promote positive outcomes for those detained. Regulations for the Criminal Record Spent Convictions Law 2016 will support the effective functioning of a new expungement board, which is now in place. And finally, regulations for the Public Authorities Law will support the governance and human resource practices of public authorities. Mr. Speaker, additionally, amendments will be made to the personnel regulations, as I mentioned earlier, to streamline our disciplinary procedures, and also to the Public Service Pension Law. There will be changes there to improve the composition of the Board of Directors and to ensure pension administration will be amendment. The Board of Directors. Another area of change for pension administration and will be amendments to the Public Service Pension ex gratia pensions regulations to facilitate minimum pensions earnings thresholds for qualifying public servants. Regulations for the Standards in Public Life Law will be given to effect. And, Mr. Speaker, as we all have been talking about, Legislative Assembly Management Bill to create a management body for the overall separation of this Parliament from the civil service will be brought in 2018, just to enhance the operations of our Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I know you are interested in the budget provisions for the Parliament in the upcoming budget. Over the next 2 years, you will see a range of ambitious activities which you have pursued, sir, and this will include adopting a docket management system, creating a digital library, improving security to the LA, and enhancing the staff complement to include a Hansard editor and a chamber page, among other things, Mr. Speaker. That's the highlights. That's the highlights, yes, sir. Mr. Speaker, the Education Standards Unit was moved under my office so that we could have a separation from the actual Education Ministry as they do the inspections of schools. And we now have that office is up and running. We've recruited staff. I'm also in discussions with the new chair of the Education Council, Mr. Scott, so that we can ensure that that unit can report into his council and they can drive that unit in terms of what audits they would like to see, and then there's a reporting structure into that office. Mr. Speaker, speak a little bit about Project Future, which, as you know, the Premier and I launched in October 2015. It was the largest change agenda in the history of the Cayman Islands Public Service, with projects informed by the 2014 EY review. As of August 2017, just over a year and a half after its implementation of the 5-year program, there are clear signs of progress. 12 projects have been closed, a further 24 were in progress, 10 in the execution stage, with 4 of these scheduled to be closed by the end of October 2017. Mr. Speaker, I have to say that Project Future has introduced new ways of working in the civil service, which not only have the potential to improve the success of non-capital projects, but serve to fill gaps in decision-making process and project management approaches within the civil service that have been identified by our Auditor General. Coordinated by the Strategic Reforms Implementation Unit, the SRIU, the program has introduced the use of business cases as tools to strengthen the quality of our advice to the government on how we can achieve their policy priorities. I am pleased to note that the vast majority of approved Project Future business cases, documents to date, 19 of 23, have been prepared by the civil service, by civil servants which have been trained up in that particular area. We're also developing a formal project management skills across the service to improve our management and delivery of projects. In 2018 and 2019, we will build on this work by embedding the good practice and lessons learned thus far from Project Future into our day-to-day work. As part of a development strategy for the civil service, we will continue to build internal capacity and capabilities in relation to business case and project management methodologies. This will enable us in training, providing more hands-on project support for civil servants engaged in project delivery and in the establishment of a project management community of practice for CIG. We're doing things differently. We have learned some hard lessons, and we are well on our way to achieving better success. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Communication, for Infrastructure, spoke about e-government, so I wouldn't go into too much detail, but I am very proud of the work that the ministry has been doing in relation to e-government. Mr. Speaker, I announced last year in my speech that our e-government steering committee had set a goal that within 3 years, that is by the end of 2019, no government entity will be allowed to ask a customer to provide any information owned by a government entity already in its possession, other than to establish identity. Mr. Speaker, how many times haven't we heard of somebody saying that I went to a particular government department and they just simply sent me over to another government department to get some paperwork? We want to put an end to that. If you go to the immigration department to submit a work permit and they then need a police clearance, you should not be sent over to the police records office. Immigration should have the ability to access your criminal record. That's just one example, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to advise that in 2018, 2019, we'll be starting to realize our goal with the introduction of interoperability of key services for entities such as General Registry, Department of Commerce and Investment, and Criminal Records Office. The infrastructure to securely facilitate this will be installed before the end of this year, and training for the systems administrators and software developers have already started. So we're well on our way, Mr. Speaker. We have also continued to make progress in many other areas that have or will improve the delivery of government services to our citizens and for improved interactions with business and industry. Mr. Speaker, the minister talked about the e-services government portal. He talked about that you can now get your police record done online. And Mr. Speaker, I can say that since the 10th of May, over 3,600 applications have been submitted via this service, or 23% of all submissions. In a recent survey of customers who utilized this service, 65% scored the service a 9 or 10. 65% on a scale of 1 to 10, which means 10 being the best. 65%. That is a very, very good start, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Infrastructure also spoke about the improvements at the planning, so I will not go over that. Just to say, Mr. Speaker, that it's important for my office and the Minister to work together to achieve the results that he has stated in his speech. And Mr. Speaker, I can say without reservations that the exact same aspirations that the Minister has for how he would like to see his departments and agencies operate are identical to mine. We have the exact same goal, and I want to ensure the Minister that he will have the full support of my office and the civil service as he looks to make some major changes to the services in planning, trade and business, and the driver's license areas, to name a few. We're all on the same page, Mr. Speaker, and we all want to achieve fantastic results for our people. Mr. Speaker, allow me to speak a little bit about our strategic plan. Mr. Speaker, as you know, strategic, effective planning is a critical component of good management and governance. Planning helps assure us that an organization remains relevant and responsible to the needs of the people it serves. It enables us to look into the future in an orderly and systematic way. It facilitates new programs development. It also provides a basis for monitoring progress and assessing results and impact. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we have taken important steps forward to develop the very first strategic plan for the civil service. Mr. Speaker, hundreds of civil servants and other stakeholders provided frank feedback through our Civil Service Reimagining Initiative. But instead of focusing on our deficiencies and problems, like so many other reports do, we focused on what was possible when the civil service was at its best. This work was coordinated by the SRIU and is now involved through a partnership with the portfolio of the civil service in specific objectives and actions to be pursued as part of a 5-year strategic plan for the civil service. Mr. Speaker, our vision is bold. It is to be a world-class civil service. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that vision immediately puts a bullseye on every civil servant's back. Why? Because the public will expect us to be world-class overnight, and that won't happen. But the added pressure will drive the right behavior. Mr. Speaker, some have asked, why be so bold? Why world-class? Mr. Speaker, the answer is simple. Because that's what the people, the elected officials, and civil servants deserve. They do not deserve regional best or Caribbean best. We want to be world class. The public deserves world class programs and services. Elected officials deserve world class policy, advice, and implementation. And civil servants deserve a world class employer. Mr. Speaker, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, "The country needs, and unless I mistake its temper, the country demands bold, persistent experimentation. It is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something. The millions who are in want and will not stand by silently forever, while the things to satisfy their needs are within easy reach." Let me say that again, Mr. Speaker. But above all, try something. The millions who are in want will not stand by silently forever, while the things to satisfy their needs are within easy reach. Is not what we've been hearing here in the Cayman Islands. So I think that quote, Mr. Speaker, is very appropriate and relevant to our beloved islands. But it requires, as the former president said, bold, persistent experimentation. We have to be doing things differently to achieve different results. Because, Mr. Speaker, we must aspire to be the best by any standards. We aspire to make excellence our norm in the civil service. And in 2018 and 2019 and beyond, we are committed to implementing programs and policies and procedures that will serve to ensure that we become increasingly effective at working with the elected government to deliver excellent incomes for the people of the Cayman Islands, at providing excellent standards of customer service, at operating in a fair and equitable manner, and at offering good value for money in the way in which we use the resources entrusted to us by the public. Mr. Speaker, to achieve this, stakeholders within the civil service and the private sector identified 5 key goals for us to tackle: leadership, customer service, customer experience, talent development, communication, and governance. In each of these areas, the aspiration is excellence. Giving our starting point in some of these areas, the cynical response might be to consider this unattainable. However, I am forever reminded that these are not just lofty aspirations. Currently, across the civil service, there are numerous examples of excellence. Our greatest challenge, therefore, is to make this practice our business as usual. While all 5 goals are going live in 2018 and 2019, the priority goals over the next 2 years are customer service and leadership, which we believe are the keys to unlocking success in all the other goal areas. Let me explain. Mr. Speaker, customer experience. Mr. Speaker, continuing the trend of making bold new projections around planning improvements for our customer, I'm excited to announce just a few developments for our strategic plan for the civil service that speak to our commitment to putting the customer at the heart of everything we do. Beginning next month, we will place customer feedback devices in 10 high-traffic departments to measure customer satisfaction in real time. This will allow us, Mr. Speaker, to benchmark the level of customer service being provided, but will also promote accountability. Commencing next year, we will provide dedicated support to these departments to assist them in driving improved performance, including introducing training for all frontline personnel and their managers. Mr. Speaker, I like to lead by example. I'm going to attend some of these customer service training because I want the same exact training that my staff is getting. Work will also commence in 2018 to roll out delivery service standards so there's a greater transparency and accountability for performance at the department level. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, this means extending customer service measurements for departments who transact most of their business at arm's length, including governments whose primary customers, whose government agencies, whose primary customers are internal customers. So we want to make sure that all of our agencies, not just the public-facing ones, but the ones who are supporting those outside agencies, are all working to the same level. Mr. Speaker, someone said, a company is doing right if both their employees and customers are happy. I agree. The data we receive from our customers will provide objective feedback on the effectiveness of our customer service improvement strategies. This is very much an outward-facing measure that we will use to gauge our progress. At the same time, we're also giving priority to ensure that we know how our employees feel about our organization. An engaged employee is important as he or she will be enthusiastic about work and take positive action to further the organization's reputation and interests. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, another initiative to come from our strategic plan will be the implementation of an employee engagement survey. Our employee engagement survey started just this week, seeking frank feedback from each and every civil servant. This survey will provide baseline data against which we can measure our progress with employee engagement that sheds light on the many facets of the civil service, such as leadership, learning and development, organizational culture, pay and benefits, and inclusion and fair treatment, to name a few. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we are not only preparing ambitious plans for improvement, we are establishing accountability mechanisms that will provide objective feedback from our customers and our staff about what progress is being made. This feedback would allow us to know what is working and what is not, and to make the necessary adjustments as we move forward in our journey towards world-class standards. Leadership. Mr. Speaker, the other area in the strategic plan that will be tackled in 2018 and 2019 is leadership. Mr. Speaker, I have listened to complaints from the public and this week, members of this honorable House about the ineffectiveness of our public services. Complaints vary, whether it's a lack of enforcement or substandard service. But, Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of complaints can be attributed to one thing: poor leadership. Mr. Speaker, what I have found in the civil service is that we have trained our staff to be good technocrats. But those who are leaders, we have not trained them to be great leaders. We need leaders that will inspire and motivate their staff while holding them accountable. We need leaders that are going to own their responsibilities and not shy away from making the tough decisions required for us to reach that world-class level. Mr. Speaker, we need look no further for an example of great leadership than yourself, which you displayed here on Wednesday. An issue was brought to your attention, Mr. Speaker. You owned the issue and you took decisive action. That is the leadership that we need to be the business as usual in the civil service. Mr. Speaker, you did not shy away from the issue that was brought to your attention. You made a decision, you owned it, and you made your decision. Whether people liked it or not is besides the point. The matter was dealt with appropriately. That, Mr. Speaker, is good leadership. So how are we going to get there, Mr. Speaker? Our leadership training has already begun. We have trained 100 leaders and aspiring leaders during a one-day leadership summit led by a distinguished author and motivational speaker. Each year, for the past 3 years, we have sent leaders to a public service leadership conference in Toronto, hosted by the International Public Administration. Locally, senior leaders and aspiring leaders have been sponsored to participate in Leadership Cayman, organized by the Chamber of Commerce, and the Executive Global Certificate in Leadership, offered jointly by UCCI and FIU. So we have already started our leadership training. Early next year, Mr. Speaker, we will extend our use of the 360 feedback, which currently applies to myself and chief officers, to all heads of department. Within 3 years, 360 feedback will be applied to all of the approximately 300 persons who act as supervisors, managers, and strategic leaders. We are currently launching the Cayman Islands Government core competencies, which identify the essential behaviors needed for individual contributors, supervisors, managers, and strategic leaders to realize our shared vision to be a world-class civil service. These competencies are represented in 3 clusters: developing capabilities, working together, and delivering results. Mr. Speaker, beginning in 2018, strategic leaders and HODs will lead by example and be the first to adopt these core competencies as part of their performance objectives. The program will allow the civil service to strengthen performance management and to more accurately assess leadership behaviors in addition to their outputs. Mr. Speaker, dedicated support will be provided to bolster leadership across the organization. We are developing a leadership academy as a component of the Civil Service College, which will consolidate and expand local and overseas learning and develop opportunities which are linked to core competencies and functional competencies, which are job-specific. Mr. Speaker, what I would also like the civil service to do is also look at innovative ways of solving problems, to work smarter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in our research, a number of governments and civil services have put in place something called a behavioral insight team. They call them nudge units. And when a government has a particular problem, they will give it to this special unit and says, come up with an innovative way of solving this problem. I'll give you 2 examples, Mr. Speaker. I found these to be fascinating. In the UK, in a particular borough, people were parking their cars outside their homes, in front of their garages, and they were being stolen at night. Every night, a car was stolen from in front of a house. Now, Mr. Speaker, what would we do in Cayman if in my district in West Bay, we begin to get a rash of car thefts? We would put in CCTV. We would ask the police to do more patrols. We would put in more policemen. We would do a lot of things that cost a lot of money. This particular unit came out, looked at the situation, saw that everyone was parking their cars in front of their garages every evening, and then their cars were getting stolen. So instead of more policemen, more CCTV, they said to the people, the homeowners, why don't you simply clean out your garage and park your car in the garage? End of story. People put their cars in the garages and they stopped being stolen. Didn't cost anybody anything. Another initiative was the courts found that a lot of traffic tickets, something like 10%, were being paid. What would we do if only 10% of the public were not paying their traffic fines? I mean, what we do now. We send a policeman out to go hunt the person down and arrest them. We up the fines. They sent this problem to our nudge unit, and they said, okay, let's try a new strategy. So they had the people's all of their information, and they sent them a text message. Pay your fine or get prosecuted. When the person got a text message, they didn't send them a letter. Letters don't work. They sent them a personal text message. Come and pay your court fine by this particular date, your traffic fine. Right away, they got 5% better compliance. The next time, they personalized it and said, Franz Manderson, you owe us $400, come and pay it. It shot up by 20%. And the last time, they sent the person a picture of their license plate and their car and their name and said, come and pay it. That was the end of the problem. But that is an innovative way that we can solve problems. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be discussing this with our elected leaders and looking around the civil service as to how we can develop that type of expertise within our civil service to work smarter, to find innovative ways of solving some of the issues that face us. Because, Mr. Speaker, in a way, a lot of the problems that we have here are experienced all over the world, except that they do it in a much larger scale. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel, so let us all work together to come up with some easy solution to some of our big problems. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to say that I have always acknowledged and indeed welcomed the significant public scrutiny the civil service attracts. As I've explained before, we do the people's work and should be held accountable. Regretfully, Mr. Speaker, comments on the civil service are often framed with negative headlines. But, Mr. Speaker, I trust that I have demonstrated today, through the many examples of achievement and progress, that while the civil service is under intense pressure and scrutiny, we are tackling the issues head-on and have bold plans for dramatic improvement. Mr. Speaker, I want to express my sincere thanks to all civil servants who work hard every day to serve their government and the people of these islands. There are many who exceed customer expectations. Over the next few years, we want this to become the norm. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the dedicated professionals in the wider portfolio of the civil service that continue to drive improvements in HR management, public sector reform, and governance. Led by a highly capable Chief Officer, Ms. Gloria McField-Nixon, this team continues to produce sterling work that benefits performance across the entire civil service and delivers tangible results. The civil service has not only survived an extended period of austerity, but despite the odds, managed to thrive and drive innovation and regain respect in many areas. This budget, Mr. Speaker, presents a real turning point where we can return to business as usual and accelerate HR modernizations to fuel performance and realize the vision of being a world-class civil service. Mr. Speaker, for this vision to be achieved, it will take the entire civil service working in tandem to make a difference in the lives of those we serve. As such, I also wish to thank the talented group of chief officers who expertly lead their respective ministries and portfolios and who work closely with me every day as we reform and change the culture of our civil service. Mr. Speaker, all of the improvements that I have mentioned would not have been achieved without the hard work of chief officers, and I thank them all. Mr. Speaker, as Deputy Governor and Head of the Civil Service, I ask for your continued support, as well as the support of all of the honorable members of this House and the listening public. Together, we can ensure that the work delivered by the civil service continues to provide a solid bedrock upon which the social well-being, economic growth, and national competitiveness of the Cayman Islands can be sustained and expanded. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I wish to offer my personal congratulations and support to the Minister of Finance and his team for delivering his first budget. By all accounts, Honorable Minister, you have done an excellent job, and we wish you and your team continued success. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am conscious that this is bordering on to social hours on a Friday evening. Bordering on antisocial hours. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I must publicly congratulate the Honorable Deputy Governor for a very passionate presentation. Well done. Mr. Speaker, I rise to offer my contribution to the budget address and throne speech, together with the government's policy statement. And I wish to congratulate Her Excellency, as well as the Honorable Premier and the Honorable Minister of Finance for the presentations of the throne speech, the policy statement, and the budget address, respectively. I intend, Mr. Speaker, to touch briefly on a number of departments that falls under the portfolio of legal affairs, starting with the anti-money laundering unit. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, as you're no doubt aware, the government is working tirelessly to prepare for the upcoming Caribbean Financial Action Task Force fourth round mutual evaluation in early December. The Cayman Islands will be assessed, Mr. Speaker, for effective implementation of the revised 40 FATF recommendations that was promulgated in 2012 and the related methodology that was promulgated in 2013. To this end, Mr. Speaker, the anti-money laundering unit in the portfolio of legal affairs has coordinated development of a national risk assessment dealing with anti-money laundering. And this was done on behalf of the Anti-Money Laundering Steering Group. The unit itself, Mr. Speaker, is also serving as a focal point for disseminating information on the results of the National Risk Assessment to all the relevant competent authorities and self-regulatory bodies. They are also serving as a focal point for the financial institutions and the designated non-financial businesses and professions, Mr. Speaker. This latter group consists of the casinos, real estate agents, dealers of precious metals and stones, lawyers, and accountants, as well as those who are involved in trust and corporate services businesses, Mr. Speaker. The Anti-Money Laundering Unit has also overseen the implementation of a number of new legislation or amendments to existing anti-money laundering related legislation with a view to strengthening the existing statutory framework, Mr. Speaker, for combating money laundering, combating terrorist financing, and of course proliferation of financing, and making sure that they are in conformity with international standards. Mr. Speaker, for the wider public, proliferation financing refers to the act of providing funding or financial services which are used for the possession, acquisition, manufacture, export or stockpiling, or the use of nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. Some of the legislative changes that I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, include amendments to the Proceeds of Crime law as well as the terrorism law. And the latter piece of legislation, the terrorism law, seeks to implement the requirements of the United Nations Convention on the Suppression of Financing of Terrorism. Mr. Speaker, we are also proposing additional amendments to bring the terrorism law further in line with relevant FATF standards. We have also, Mr. Speaker, recently promulgated on the 2nd of October a new set of anti-money laundering regulations, replacing the old regulations. And the new regulations are far more contemporary as they now reflect in all their manifestations the revised 40 FATF recommendations, Mr. Speaker, some of which, as we know, deal with the issue of beneficial ownership for legal persons. Mr. Speaker, we are also seeking to amend the penal code to include a more streamlined provision that would create a predicate offense to money laundering where certain revenues of the government are defrauded. The proposed amendment seeks to make certain acts or omission, when it is done with intent to defraud the government of revenues, make them what we call a predicate offense. So, Mr. Speaker, these are some of the illustrations of the government ongoing initiatives to further enhance the relevant legal and institutional framework of the Cayman Islands. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, they demonstrate the government's continuing commitment to comply with international standards and best practices in the areas of anti-money laundering and combating of the financing of terrorism. Mr. Speaker, these initiatives have been pursued in partnership with the Ministry of Financial Services, the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, and, as is customary, in consultation with the financial services industry and other stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, on conclusion of the on-site mutual evaluation in mid-December, we are keen to demonstrate that that would not be the end of the work for the anti-money laundering unit and the stakeholders involved in this initiative. In 2018, we're hoping to embark on training and awareness in a number of areas, Mr. Speaker, including a general awareness for money laundering reporting officers and compliance officers, and for sanctions-related initiatives, Mr. Speaker, dealing with terrorism and financing thereof, as well as general anti-money laundering risk. Mr. Speaker, it is well known and accepted that the continuing good reputation of the financial services industry of these islands is paramount. It is therefore imperative that we continue to work together, public and private sector, of course, to enable its continuing viability. These islands have been reviewed every which way, and we have always managed to demonstrate our adherence to international standards. Mr. Speaker, we are painfully aware that the upcoming review by the CFATF is not going to be an easy one. Indeed, I make bold to say it is going to be rigorous. We are all aware that Cayman Islands is not given any margin of error. The standards themselves are onerous. And in support of this observation, I just want to remind this House, Mr. Speaker, that some major countries have undergone this review and have been categorized for enhanced follow-up. Countries such as the United States, Canada, Belgium, and Australia have all gone through this fourth round of evaluation and were put into what we call enhanced follow-up, which is that they're given like about a year to ensure that all the weaknesses that have been identified during the review are addressed, and has to be done within a particular time frame. Very tight, very onerous. Mr. Speaker, one thing is clear, is that as we have done in the past, we will prevail. We have some of the best and brightest professionals, private and public sector, and they are assisting with this preparation, and we're confident that we will continue to demonstrate to the world that our financial services industry, our regulatory framework, our administrative and other legal framework are among the best in the world. Mr. Speaker, allow me to also make reference to the work of the Financial Reporting Authority, the FRA. They are also involved in the parallel efforts in respect of the upcoming mutual valuation. And this agency, Mr. Speaker, is under the able leadership of a new director, Mr. Robert R.J. Berry, who was appointed in 2016. The FRA, pursuant to its mandate under the Proceeds of Crime Law, has continued its diligent work in the field of financial intelligence, and in particular, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the analysis of financial information disclosures in order to counter money laundering, terrorism, of course, and financing thereof. Along with the Anti-Money Laundering Unit, Monetary Authority, the Ministry of Financial Services, the FRA played a key role, Mr. Speaker, in completing the national risk assessment that I mentioned earlier. And this is part of the preparation for the upcoming evaluation. The risk assessment relates to the island's obligation to identify, assess, and effectively mitigate money laundering and terrorism financing risk, and to utilize resources, Mr. Speaker, to counter those risks in a most efficient manner. In anticipation of this new responsibility, or some of the upcoming responsibility, Mr. Speaker, a dedicated sanctions coordinator was appointed to the Financial Reporting Authority in 2017. The post holder plays a critical role in the implementation and enforcement of targeted financial sanctions and other restrictive measures related to anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism and proliferation. Mr. Speaker, we just need to remind ourselves about some of these United Nations Security Council resolutions dealing with places like North Korea. Those, believe it or not, concerns us as well, given the nature of the business that we're in. So sanctions coordinator has been appointed and has direct responsibility for dealing with those. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the FRA, I would like to highlight that during the period 2016-2017, the FRA received over 600 new suspicious activity reports. The total number of reports exceeded 600 for the second consecutive fiscal year. And Mr. Speaker, we think that the growing numbers is indicative of the vigilance of the reporting entities against efforts of unscrupulous persons to launder money in our jurisdiction, and of course, the display of enhanced due diligence on the part of our financial services providers. Mr. Speaker, another area that falls under the portfolio of legal affairs is the Truman Button Law School. And that deals with the provision of legal education. As part of the Truman Button Law School's long-standing relationship with the University of Liverpool, in September 2017, 2 new postgraduate programs were launched. The Postgraduate Diploma and Master of Laws, LLM, in International Finance on a part-time basis. And it is anticipated, Mr. Speaker, that from 2019, the programs will be provided on a full-time basis, Mr. Speaker. Yet another outstanding achievement for the law school in 2017 was the establishment of a new postgraduate partnership with Oxford Brookes University in the UK in relation to our professional practice course, known as the PPC from the law school, thanks to the dedicated effort of the director of the law school and his staff. Mr. Speaker, what it means is that persons who successfully completed the PPC course will now get a certificate from Oxford Brookes University in the UK, evidencing the completion thereof. Mr. Speaker, the university, Oxford Brookes, will also, from 2017 September, will be awarding its postgraduate diploma in legal practice to our students. The significance of the PPC course, Mr. Speaker, is that for those students who have completed their LLB degrees here and are not desirous of proceeding to the United Kingdom to further their studies, they do the PPC and then they go on to do articles, 18 months of articles. So it's quite a useful course. Mr. Speaker, additionally, in September 2019, the law school intends to enter into an agreement again with Oxford Brookes University, which will allow successful PPC students at our law school to register with that university for a Master's of Law degree in legal practice to be awarded also from that university and completion of the relevant dissertation. Mr. Speaker, you will appreciate the significance of this milestone, not just for law school and its reputation, but also for the graduates who will now have the opportunity to expand the scope of their academic qualifications without the associated expense of studying and residing abroad in doing so. Mr. Speaker, the law school graduation that recently took place in August showed some stellar results with Mr. Speaker, of the 8 PPC graduates, 4 students graduated with distinction and the other 4 graduated with commendation. Of the 11 graduates in the LLB degree program, 2 were awarded first-class honors, and 6 received upper second-class honors degrees. And Mr. Speaker, though the graduating class was smaller than previous years, the proportion of the number of students graduating this year, these results were definitely, amongst the best that the law school has ever recorded. Mr. Speaker, no student passed the PPC with less than a commendation, and this has never happened before. Every student passed with at least a commendation. Mr. Speaker, I would therefore understandably wish to congratulate the director and his staff for their excellent job in providing legal education to our students from our own law school, a really first-rate legal education program, which is helping to upskill our people. Mr. Speaker, I move now to legislative drafting department. Earlier I touched on the legislative reform in the context of the upcoming mutual evaluation. I would add, however, that the various legislative initiatives that I've referred to only form part of the work of the legislative drafting department. Legislative Council, Mr. Speaker, have continued and in the coming year will continue to work on proposed amendments to existing laws, including the evidence law, matrimonial causes law, youth justice law, as well as the promulgation of new laws such as the Cost in Criminal Proceedings Bill, which, Mr. Speaker, will seek to streamline the procedures by which courts determine when costs should be awarded to defendants who have been acquitted. Mr. Speaker, the department is also continuing to assist with the work on the data protection regulations. Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Myrtle Brandt, who headed that department for some 20 years and who was so familiar and helpful to all of us, finally retired in June of this year. And we certainly wished her an enjoyable and well-deserved retirement, Mr. Speaker. The department is now headed by Ms. Cheryl Neblett, who was formerly the director of the Law Reform Commission. Mr. Speaker, members will recall the case of Donnet Thompson versus the HSA. That was a case that was described by the courts as sad and troubling. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, the Legislative Assembly amended the HSA law in June of last year to modify the scope of the immunity afforded to the authority, Mr. Speaker. If we recall, it was a case where medical negligence was alleged in respect of a child who was born in very unfortunate circumstances. And I say alleged, Mr. Speaker, because no negligence has been proven against anybody at this stage, neither the hospital nor the attendant doctors. But the problem there was that the way the law was crafted is that the parties were barred from even bringing the action to court in the first place to allege negligence. So the law has been changed, and it is now the position that the authorities, directors, and the committees, HSA authorities and directors, of course, will not be liable for acts and omissions unless it can be shown that the act or omission was either negligent or in bad faith, Mr. Speaker. Prior to that, it was just, could only be sued if you could demonstrate bad faith, which is very difficult to prove, which is tantamount to intent, willful intent. But Mr. Speaker, what that means is that in order to ensure consistency with similar immunity provisions in other laws, we are now undertaking a review of the various other laws to try and harmonize the similar sections in other law to make sure, where appropriate, Mr. Speaker, that persons might be able to bring actions in negligence. And Mr. Speaker, it is true that there are some statutory authorities where this might not be appropriate given the nature of the work that they're involved in. And so we will have to ensure that in doing so, we don't invite what is called a floodgate effect, allowing people to allege negligence in every action or every steps taken by some of these regulatory authorities. So we're working on ensuring, Mr. Speaker, that there is an appropriate balance that is allowing litigants, where appropriate, to bring a claim in negligence. Of course, they will still have to prove negligence. And also ensuring that in respect of some authorities, that they continue to enjoy certain degree of protection from certain claims in negligence. Mr. Speaker, I touch briefly now on the Law Revision Commission. The Law Revision Commission, headed by a new director, our new commissioner, Mrs. Camille Stoll-Davy. She joined us in 2016 and will be working to achieve a more harmonized structure for all stages of our legislative process. That is from the drafting of the bills to the gazettal of the laws. We're trying to establish, Mr. Speaker, and we're hoping at some stage to partner with the Legislative Assembly in this initiative. We will have a sort of a harmonized workflow where we can track the work from the moment the bills have been drafted, the moment it's sent to the clerk, enacted, sent back to the governor for assent, publication. All parties can be working basically from the same platform to ensure that there is consistency and harmony. We're hoping to be able to roll that out sometime during the course of next year, Mr. Speaker, and we'll certainly hear more about that. Mr. Speaker, and the Law Reform Commission itself, as you know, the Commission's mandate is to study and review the statutes and other laws comprising the laws of the Cayman Islands with a view to their systemic development and reform, systematic development and reform. That is, Mr. Speaker, to keep them contemporary. This work, Mr. Speaker, is inevitably ongoing and of significant importance given the ever-changing needs of contemporary Cayman Island society. Mr. Speaker, we have a Bill of Rights, which is enshrined in our Constitution, and also there is a need to reform the laws to reflect government's priorities. And so, Mr. Speaker, the work of the Law Reform Commission is understandably of vital importance in trying to keep us in the cutting edge of legislative proposals. Mr. Speaker, some of the initiatives that the Law Reform Commission will be looking at is the measures to introduce provisions which will facilitate plea bargaining or plea agreements between the defendants and the prosecutions, and the prosecution when determining the offenses to be tried and the penalties to be pursued. They will also be looking, Mr. Speaker, at the introduction of provisions intended to safeguard the interest of consumers and to provide adequate remedies when consumer standards are breached. Mr. Speaker, they will also be looking at modernization of the computer misuse law in order to respond to the various forms of cyber criminal conduct and cyber security issues. In this respect of this particular project, Mr. Speaker, recent headlines just last week about data security incident at one of the island's leading law firm and fiduciary firms would have served as a sobering reminder to the government and to all concerned, of course, of the need for vigilance in the ever-complex IT world in which we live and operate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as ever, the work of the Law Reform Commission is in the form of legislative recommendations to government. Therefore, all these initiatives will have to go through the various stages of policy discussions before any final acceptance. But, Mr. Speaker, they are, as expected, well thought out and well-researched recommendations for government's consideration. Mr. Speaker, continuing on issues from the portfolio, please allow me to observe that both the Solicitor General and myself, and with the support of our Honorable Deputy Governor, continue to facilitate and encourage the training and continuing professional developments of Caymanians within the portfolio through our article clerk training programs, as well as on-the-job professional development, both locally and abroad, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to report that our last article clerks took up legal position within the civil service, with Mr. Kern Owens now providing legal advisor support to the RCIPS, and Mr. Gavin Dixon having joined the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution as a Crown Counsel. Mr. Speaker, there are currently 2 article clerks undertaking their legal training within the portfolio, one of whom, Ms. Davina Ramator, Assistant Clerk, who is familiar to many of us in this House, and the other, Mr. Gerard Coe, who is scheduled to complete his articles within the first quarter of 2018. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to note that over the past 10 years, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to note that over the past 10 years, the portfolio has provided training to over 20 law school graduates seeking to undertake their articles. As part of the portfolio's commitment to affording Caymanians the opportunity to cross that final hurdle before qualifying as practitioners, I'm extremely pleased to announce that the portfolio has sought to include in its budget for 2018-19 funding for an additional article clerk's position, which will allow us to increase our article clerk's complement to 3, Mr. Speaker. As is years before, I want to reiterate my thanks to SEMA and to the various private firms such as Maples and Walkers for partnering with the portfolio in allowing our article clerks the invaluable opportunity to undertake part of their training within these firms. This collaboration, Mr. Speaker, of course, argues to the benefit of the individual article clerks, but ultimately to the legal profession as a whole. Mr. Speaker, demand on the portfolio for legal services across government continues to grow. This, Mr. Speaker, has included a considerable number of well-publicized challenges to matters under the immigration law, and in particular delays in the processing of applications for permanent residence. In addition, Mr. Speaker, there are Bill of Rights issues that have continued to engage our chambers, and the trend which we expect may well continue into the coming years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of national security, please allow me to applaud the government for its ongoing commitment to the safety and security of these islands, as evidenced by, among other things, the provision of appropriation for 75 new police officers over the next 3 years. This initiative, Mr. Speaker, will understandably result in greater visibility of the police in the various districts. It is no secret that our officers are stretched as the Commissioner of Police and his officers endeavor to keep our streets and our street and our neighborhood safe. And Mr. Speaker, they deserve our support and our encouragement. Mr. Speaker, it is also appropriate for me to use this forum to join with those who have expressed their consternation and indeed disgust at the recent spate of inexcusable assaults on our police officers. It is out of character with these islands, and it must be condemned by all right-thinking members of our society. Police officers should be assisted, Mr. Speaker, not assaulted. Assaulting police officers is a direct attack on the rule of law and one that must be condemned in the strongest terms, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I wish to thank the very hard-working staff of the Portfolio of Legal Affairs for the continuing dedication and professionalism. They continue to toil quietly, and I certainly do appreciate their efforts, Mr. Speaker. And finally, as ever, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the government for the continuing funding and their support of the initiatives of the portfolio, Mr. Speaker, as we pledge our support to continue to provide quality legal services in the coming years and beyond. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all members for working hard today, and in light of those efforts and relative good behavior, I think we should go home early, 15 minutes early tonight. Mr. Speaker, I want to say to members that we intend to wind up the debate on the budget on Monday and to start Finance Committee at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. That way we will be able to conduct Cabinet, and we can press on with the consideration of the budget. We know we're working against a very hard deadline of the 24th of November to complete the business of this meeting. Hence, the late nights. I again wish to thank members for their cooperation in doing the country's work. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of this honorable House until 10 a.m. on Monday, the 6th of November, at 10 a.m.
The question is that this Honorable House do now adjourn until 10 a.m. on Monday, the 6th of November, 2017. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. This Honorable House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. on Monday, 6th November, God willing.